Thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Anya Andino. I am a disaster scientist. I will be graduating in May from the University of Delaware with my master's degree in disaster science and management. Master of Disaster. How cool is that?
Cool.
My first degree was in civil engineering, and I've been doing that for 16 years. And I got tired of it, but I got a really good experience working through my job at Hurricane Maria relief with my home in Puerto Rico. So it was very touching, it was very neat. That's when I realized that disaster science was a thing that people did, and I could get into that. I'm gonna introduce my fellow panelists here, and then we'll get started. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Scarborough. I don't know a lot about disaster science except what Zanya has been teaching me because I was originally an English major. Well, get this, now I'm in STEM, so hold it.
We love a woman in STEM.
We do love a woman in STEM. I'm currently in my last semester of getting a degree in computer programming. So anyone need a computer programmer? I need a job, so we're gonna network a second.
Yes.
So there we go.
Yes, please.
And my last panelist
Sorry, I remember.
is busy, so I guess I get to
Okay.
vamp a little. No, I don't.
That's
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Joseph Sherman. I have a background in electronics and computer engineering, and I'm here mostly providing a little bit of anecdotal experience when it comes to disasters in the context of our panel here. As far as actual background in disaster science, I've a little bit of indirect experience with emergency management, but besides that, I'm mostly just here to provide support and anecdotal firsthand experience.
Sweet. And shout out to Justin and Andrew, who are in my cohort but could not make it to MAGFest. Also, hi, Mom. We're going to go over the emergency exits. There is no evacuation plan posted, which is very concerning, but please go to the marked exits in case of emergency on either side of the room. All right, welcome. Is there anybody here that works in disaster management or paramedics, firefighters?
Ooh.
Got a couple people, okay.
Nice.
It's a big any other first responders? I will be using the words scientist, disaster scientist, practitioner, and emergency managers interchangeably. They're different sides of the same coin. It might be working on the research side or working in the actual field, but they'll be in there, just a language situation. All right, here's what we're gonna go through. I'm gonna explain what disaster science is. I will, save you the $30,000 for the master's degree and teach you what I've learned in the past 2 years in 20 minutes. We're gonna go over how games are used in practice and research, how games use principles from disaster science and whether they agree with the science or disagree. And then we'll give you some real-world tips for surviving your own personal disaster. All right, so what is it and why does it matter? So, disaster science is multidisciplinary. Like I said, I started out as a civil engineer and then I got into disaster science. There are tons of people in my cohort. There was one other engineer, a poet, an archaeologist. It's a motley crew. Researchers draw from areas as diverse as sociology, engineering, psychology, and public policy, anthropology, and the history of disaster. So the way it's spread, it's fairly new. It started in the 50s and 60s as the civil defense era, where they decided that a disaster was like a bomb. They wanted to see how people would react if a bomb ever happened. That's why I have the Fallout character here.
Vault Boy, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is set in that era when the research started. The next was the natural hazards area, which still continues to be studied and explored, and that's when a disaster is like a hurricane. In the 1980s, the full disaster science kind of came into its own, and a disaster is like a crack in your beehive, where when something happens, it shows things that are wrong in the structure of your community. So, what is disaster? Disaster is a spectrum. It's the emergency, disaster, catastrophe spectrum. Small scale, at one end of the spectrum, emergencies are usually small scale, localized incidents which are resolved quickly using local resources. However, small scale emergencies can escalate into disasters when there has been inadequate planning and wasteful use of resources. An emergency is your house being on fire. At the other end of the spectrum, disasters are typically large-scale and cross geographic, political, academic boundaries. Disasters require a level of response and recovery greater than local communities can provide. So when you overwhelm the local, it moves to disaster. When you ask for help and that gets overwhelmed, it turns into a catastrophe. So if your downtown is on fire, that's a disaster. If your whole state, if your whole region is on fire, that is a catastrophe. So what is a disaster anyways? A lot of people can't agree on a full definition. So for the purpose of brevity and this analysis, we're going to go with the International Federation of the Red Cross Red Crescent's definition, which is disasters are serious disruptions to the functioning of a community that exceeded its capacity to cope using its own resources. Disasters can be caused by natural, man-made, and technological hazards, as well as various factors that influence the exposure and vulnerability of a community. The vulnerability of your community is that crack in the beehive. Disasters also have phases. And the way they're thought about are preparedness. Are you prepared for the disaster? Response. How are you going to help your community? How are your firefighters going to get there? How are you going to ask for help from local entities? Then to recovery, which is how is your community going to get better? Mitigation deals with how your community will be better prepared for the next time. It's a circle because everything kind of blends in together and there's a lot of overlap, including recovery. So, in practice, how are games used in DISA, disaster science research? So, gaming provides a platform for creativity and engagement. It offers a unique opportunity to stimulate complex scenarios and encourage problem solving. We will not be covering serious games. Serious games integrate educational content with gaming elements. They can be used to raise awareness and promote resilience in the face of disasters. So that's like airplane simulators, medical stuff. There's a game that you can see the Great Barrier Reef coral leaching by changing the temperature of the water and see how that works. All right, Joe's going to take it away.
You can take it away? All right.
Yes.
So I'm definitely dating myself a little bit, but I was actually there during this outbreak in 2005 in World of Warcraft with the very first widespread digital pandemic that I think was recorded happened. And to give a brief overview of how this all worked, there was a new dungeon released called Zul'Gurub, and the very end boss, you know what I'm talking about. The very end of the end boss of Zul'Gurub is called Hakar, and it has a debuff it would give to characters called Corrupted Blood, and it would do tons and tons of damage. Survivable at high level, you could dispel it, a couple classes could. But what people found out was hunter pets, they're a class in the game that had a pet that would follow them, could get this Corrupted Blood debuff, and then hunters, the class, could dismiss the pet, but it would still have the debuff on it. And the way Corrupted Blood worked if there was any playable character nearby that got too close to somebody with that debuff, they would also get it. Well, people would go into the major cities like the auction houses and other places where people from levels 1 to 60 would hang out. And they just release their pet and infect everybody with it. So you'd have these massive plagues of people with corrupted blood, and it was like a real life plague. You'd have people dying immediately. You'd have people flipping out. It would create lots of lag. You see the piles of skeletons there from low-level people who were farming, running their auction house bots and farming gold and all kinds of other little in-game things happening. They would just die because they're like low level, they're level 1. And there are multiple effects from this. Some people would run toward the disaster. They'd go there to try to help or just go there to glock, like rubbernecking. Some people would flip out and run away because they were low level and they couldn't handle it. It had economic effects, much like real-world pandemics, like with COVID happened. A lot of the economy was player-driven in World of Warcraft at that time. So when people weren't able to get the items they wanted, there were major price discrepancies at the time, like things like silk cloth or other usually really cheap mundane things. Well, the people that were farming those items were all dead, so they couldn't actually make it for you. And there was a lot of interest and studying at the time of this due to the similarities between past real-world effects. And at the time, COVID hadn't happened yet, so they're thinking the Black Death, malaria, smallpox, Ebola, et cetera, those kinds of outbreaks. There were attempts from the CDC and other major industries to actually collect the data on the outbreak from Blizzard at the time, but I don't believe Blizzard was ever actually able to provide it. Maybe they didn't have the data or just were unwilling. But there were a lot of secondary studies and analyses done, and this was actually considered one of the first major computerized simulations of sorts of a disease outbreak in any mass form, and it actually kind of kickstarted using computer simulation for pandemics in a widespread way in the broader disease, what do you want to call it, infectious disease industry study, something like that.
Field,
yeah. But maybe you want to take it away with that.
You want to talk about the Lancet study?
Yeah. I mentioned it in passing. You might know a little more than I did with that one.
All right, so this figure is from a study we found for this plague in World of Warcraft. Altogether, these seemingly innocuous aspects of the game world, each directly mirroring an aspect of real-world epidemiology, allowed what should have been a very minor point of interest in a small area of the game, catering to a very specific subset of players, to become the first online instance of uncontrolled plague to affect millions of Americans, Asians, Europeans at home. This figure summarizes the dynamics of infection that produced the epidemic. So what Joe touched on, how their pets were infected, and then that's how it spread in the world. So that's one of the ways the scientists are studying games, or using games. This is from a study called Games versus Lecture-Based Learning in Disaster Risk Education and Experience in Shiraz High School Students. The games, what they found, what the research study was, they would teach two groups of students the same material, and one was lecture-based and one was game-based. The games educational method was more effective than the traditional lecture method on students' knowledge, and it can be considered as a new approach for promoting the behaviors on disaster risk management. So they were teaching them disaster science strategies, how to help your community during an earthquake, I believe it was. All the subjects mentioned in the lecture method were also observed in the teaching style, with the difference that in the methodology of the game, instructors trained students on the concepts of hazard, vulnerability, capacity, and risk through pre-designed game. The education firstly began with student surveys about the concepts and continued with the instructor's explanations of them. A simple model of a city was designed and that the instructors used to make concepts more realistic for the students. At the end, the urban demolition scenario was run by selecting a student as a disaster manager of Game City and an earthquake as a hazard. The disaster manager, in consultation with other students as relief agencies, was trying to recover the city by tools being available for response, and the best suggestion was awarded. What do you think this game looked like? It was very simple. So the students were taught the concepts and then applied it. This also was found in other studies that when you teach your kids about these things in school, they are better prepared either at home or at school, part of which why when we were in school, they did tornado drills and things like that, so you can get them in your mind and going. So practitioners in games, in order to essentially get money from FEMA when you have an emergency, you have to have these practices and methods in place. So the main guidance is in the HSEEP, which is the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. It details how things are set up. They have to be progressive and build up, because you can't, save your entire town if you don't know how the fire truck works. So it's a progressive buildup, and everything that is modeled has to be believable. So you're not, It provides a set of guiding principles for exercise and evaluation programs, as well as a common approach to exercise program management, design, and development, evaluation, and improvement planning, so that everybody's on the same page, everybody's getting graded on the same standards, but also takes into account the capabilities of your county, your state, government. Everybody works together. It includes role-playing, drills, workshops, that is a typo, and full-scale exercises where you essentially mobilize equipment and people, and you can volunteer with the Red Cross to pretend to be somebody that got their leg cut off in a terrible accident, and firefighters will come rescue you, but fake. Yes. So with these principles, it has to be believable and practical. So there are no volcano exercises in Maryland, but it's a different situation in Hawaii. So that this method takes that into account. I had said earlier that we weren't going to talk about serious games, but serious games integrate educational content with gaming elements, and they can be used to raise awareness and promote resilience to face disasters, which I found this neat little graph which sums it all up. Games. We're gonna go over how we picked some games to cover and see if they agree or disagree with the DISA science findings. We're gonna state our assumptions like good scientists. We cannot replicate exact condition. Sorry, zombie fans. Zombies aren't real, yet, right? But the people science is consistent throughout. We picked 6 disaster science findings and then grouped them and applied that information to game lore and conditions. All right, I love this suite. I also love disaster movies. But there's always a scientist that's being ignored, and I didn't realize that until I started studying this. Oh yeah. All right, so here's an overview of the principles that we picked and the games that are under consideration. Is your game on the list? Maybe. Can you see it? That might be the first one. Okay, good. All right. Global warming is up first. Global warming is real. If you don't think it's real, please leave. You can't have my ribbon. So the way global warming affects disasters is while it seems like they're happening less often, they do happen, but the storms are bigger, wetter, and slower to move across land, specifically hurricanes. But all types, tornadoes are getting bigger, there's been more of them, they're moving to places they don't usually happen. Heat and sea level rise are making people have to leave their homes as climate migrants. That is happening now. So we're not too far off from Mad Max, as pictured. Everybody wants a flaming guitar. So civilization, the original civilization, because a lot of people play Civ 6, linked global warming to the industrial age and factories. The map slowly gains pollution which the player has to address. If the pollution isn't disposed of fast enough, the map will slowly transform, with coasts becoming swamps and once fecund plains turning into arid deserts. Compared to the sprawling complexity of its sequels, Civ 1's global warming system is quite simple. Once the player starts to produce factories and the like in the industrial age or later, their map will slowly gain pollution. In Civ 6, disasters and certain cataclysmic events produce massive amounts of global warming, such as a meltdown of a nuclear power plant. The Civ 6 also includes a mechanic where carbon emissions lead to sea level rise, permanent coastal flooding, and an increase of the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. So they are agreeing with the science. Battlefield 2042 is set in 2041, where a global military conflict is driven by the exacerbation of tensions from resource depletion, we have that, extreme weather caused by climate change, we have that, a massive influx of climate refugees, and Category 6 hurricanes lead to an economic depression in 2034. So they agree with the science. Furthermore, it's a battle game, so you're fighting, but the extreme weather effects are such that tornadoes and sandstorms will affect your gameplay. Panic. So everybody has seen in movies where, you know, there's a big monster, there's something happening, and everybody starts running and screaming and being crazy. The science says that mass or widespread panic is not a thing that happens. Individuals may have instances of panic or describe their behaviors as panicky, but the decisions and behaviors are suitable for the situation. Think of a fire drill, or when a fire alarm goes off in an unknown place. You kind of look around to see what everybody else is doing. Like, is this real? Is it a test? Do we need to go somewhere? And you kind of assess it. Like, if it keeps going, we're like, okay, maybe I should go. You go outside, you think about it some more, and then you might eventually leave. Like, if anybody was here for KatsuCon 2016, there was a fire drill event, and people were out of the con. Afterwards. So humans are very sociable beings and will continue to be to the very end, even if that gets them into trouble. So, panic. Resident Evil?
Resident Evil?
Yes.
Yes, so this is still from the beginning of Resident Evil 3, the remake, and as you can see, there was a lot of panic at the beginning of that, and that's not just because you were being chased by a gigantic dude who was really out to kill all of the stars. So at the beginning, you can see suddenly it starts out, everything seems fine, and then suddenly there's a police car in the side of the building, there's fires everywhere, and I get zombies, you know. But lot more panic than apparently actually exists.
All right, Callisto Protocol?
Yes, so the Callisto Protocol. This one is set on a prison planet of Callisto, and basically things happen. The main character, Jacob, ends up being imprisoned in the prison and has to escape. But when he wakes up in his cell, suddenly the prison is on fire. There's monsters running around. Nobody knows what's happening. And so, like, literally nobody knows. The guards don't know, the prisoners don't know, nobody knows what's going on. No one can communicate with the warden. So, obviously, everybody's panicking about this. And rather than being helped by the warden, who is incommunicado, or by the guards, who don't know what's going on, it's kind of it ends up being a guards versus prisoners kind of thing. Prisoners not really even helping each other. And spoiler alert, it's because the warden created this whole situation. So he actually deliberately let this happen, didn't communicate it with the guards. There are security robots that get reprogrammed and just start murdering everybody. So guards, prisoners alike. So equal panic across the board.
So Callisto Protocol does not agree with the science. Looting. Looting is called a disaster myth, and it involves suspension theory. Looting is often mentioned in the media, but really, who is getting the benefit? Who is benefiting from telling you that somewhere that just had a disaster also has looting going on? So several survival games make you start with nothing, and finding provisions or items is often called looting. The suspension theory is a theoretical justification for a looting type action. Community members can break into stores to obtain food and other necessities in order to provide temporary shelter and meals for those left helpless without fear of public or criminal retribution. According to Quarantelli, who is the father of disaster science, and Dines, the suspension of property loss almost defines looting out of existence. So that's part of what's highlighted here, one of my texts from school. It's an exchange of property rights. Right now, I need clean water. Right now, I need food. I will break into this grocery store and acquire those things because I cannot find them by any other means. So looting, not a thing. Disaster myth. So Rust is a survival game where you start out nothing and you're naked. There's a variety of equipment found in loot crates. Primary threat to the player is other players, and raiding is a major aspect. The objective of Rust is to survive in the wilderness using gathered or stolen materials. Players must successfully manage their hunger, thirst, and health, or risk dying. Despite the presence of hostile animals such as bears and wolves, the primary threat to the player is other players due to the game being solely multiplayer. Combat is accomplished through firearms and various weapons such as bows. In addition to vehicles controlled by non-player characters, will occasionally roam, attacking armed players. To stay protected, players must build bases or join clans to improve their chance of survival. Raiding is a major aspect of Rust, and apparently supports added content. So Rust does not agree with the science. Project Zomboid.
Hey.
This game shows that most buildings, after the zombie crisis starts, most buildings are intact and they remain untouched until you get there. So you are... So this one does agree with the science. You know, a lot of things happen, but the store is fine and you can get to things. First responders are your neighbors and not just the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Oh, come on, that is great. I thought that one was going to be the best. All right. Neighbors are usually the first responders due to location. Your neighbor lives next to you, They will probably see that your house is on fire and come out either to take a look or to actually help you. From literal neighbors to people who happen to be nearby, the Good Samaritan stopping to help you change a tire or call the ambulance after a car crash. That is your neighbor. They are helping you. They got there before the official people did. In games where you have to pick a group or join, those are your neighbors. All right, Dead Space.
Dead Space, again, the remake, but forgive me, I know the remake's better. So in this, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, given its history, so in this you play as Isaac Clarke, an engineer who goes to the Ishimura to theoretically try to fix a communications array, and then finds out that these necromorphs have basically taken over, and the crew is not doing well, and it just goes downhill from there. So with this, during the gameplay, you actually find audio logs, and you find videos? Not videos, but audio and visual logs of what all has gone on.
Security footage.
Sort of.
That's what it says in your notes.
Oh, yeah, the captain. Of the captain. There's other stuff that I
Okay.
can't think of. Anyway, so yes, you do come across that the captain was accidentally killed early, and so it led the crew to basically, with everything going on, they have to rely on each other, and you find this out through audio logs and everything. Some things that you uncover is such things like the mining crew. They band together, and they actually create traps around to try to conquer the necromorphs, which would be more helpful if they weren't using the vents. So there was that. But you also find one particular engineer, Jacob Temple, who he finds out that a doctor needs help. So he's like, yes, we need to go help this doctor. We need to save him because he's a doctor. He can help us, therefore. The doctor is evil.
Oh no.
Again, spoilers. The doctor's evil and ends up killing Jacob Temple. There's a lot of other stuff going on. I'm glossing over things. But also you come across a horticulturalist, Elizabeth Cross, who her entire team was changed into these Weezers that you have to neutralize. And she wants to stay and try to not only warn off anybody from actually entering that area, but she contacts Isaac Clarke specifically and is like, no, you can't come in here. There's a gigantic monster. We're calling it the Leviathan. It's killed all of my people. I need to stay and help them. I need to, warn everybody else. And then, so you keep coming across this over and over again, that people are trying to help, trying to do what they can in really terrible circumstances when everything's kind of against them at this point. So in this case, it does actually follow that they are the first responders.
All right, Dead Space follows the science. Prey. You're on for most of these.
I know.
just
I
keep
know
those
a lot
on.
about video games. That's also what I bring to the table.
That's why I got her.
That's the only reason. So, also set in space, Prey is basically you play as Morgan, you wake up, things happen, and then you find out you're on a spaceship that is being attacked by these Typhons, they're called, space aliens that the space station was experimenting on, because that always goes well. And they can do things like they can mimic objects, they have kinesis, they have other abilities, and there's so much more to them. And so he or she, they have to go through, figure out what all was happening. So they actually find survivors here and there. So one of the large side quests that you can go on is a bunch of survivors have gathered in one area, but they're trapped there. So they need you to actually help them defeat the Typhons that are around so that they can possibly get to an escape shuttle. So that's all of the side quests are optional, by the way. So you can choose to do that, or you can choose to literally turn your back and leave. Oh no. Most people do, I'm given to understand, do tend to help. But then there are other side quests. There's a man who jettisoned himself out into space in a cargo container. You have the choice to bring him in or just leave him to die. So you come across a lot of these side quests, and in the end you find out that how you handle these side quests is part of the ending of the game. So in the end, despite the fact that sometimes things do happen, but for the most part, you do come across mostly people who are trying to help each other.
All right, so it sounds like Prey also gives you the option to follow the science.
Yes.
Outlast.
Yeah. Outlast. So Outlast and the DLC Whistleblower. So these take place in an insane asylum wherein the patients are being experimented on, as you do. And just really, really terrible things are happening around here. So the doctors and the guards are all in on it. They're all being paid by Murkoff. They all are cool with this terrible, terrible stuff where literally part of the experiment is these people have to be as insane as possible and have violence. They have to see violence. They have to go through violence themselves in order to create this perfect host for something called a wall rider. So, in the first game, you play as Miles Upshur, who is an investigative reporter who he was actually contacted by said whistleblower in the DLC. So both of them, the investigative reporter wants to actually get into Murkoff and see what's going on, not knowing that the patients have taken over, a disaster has struck. He finds out what all is happening, and he gets to the bottom of it, but in the end, he is actually trying to help. He's trying to bring to light what is happening to these people. And similarly, Whistleblower is an insider who blows the whistle on what's going on. He contacts Miles Upshur, and then is subsequently forcibly committed against his will, and also entered into this experimental program, which thankfully doesn't last very long as the disaster strikes, and he also has to escape. So in both of them, you are playing somebody who is trying to help. When the doctors and the guards, they immediately abandon all of the people. You actually hear guards being like, no, we can't help anybody. We're in this for ourselves. We need to get to a radio. We need to get out of here. But in that case, some of it therefore follows it, but then some of it doesn't. Some people are trying to help, some people aren't. It's kind of a mix here.
All right, our next principle is preparation. To prep, specifically prep as in the zombie apocalypse is coming and I have a bunker type of preppers, right? So there is a difference between being prepared and prepping. Prepping is very expensive, and you're likely preparing for the wrong thing. So I found a study that was done in Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And this is a direct quote. Second, overall, the study's findings reveal that the majority of respondents lack the following disaster preparedness items, which include a written disaster evacuation plan, a list of emergency contact numbers, a designated safe place, familiarity with evacuation routes, a battery-operated radio, 3 days of water supply, and savings for evacuation expenses. In conclusion, building community resilience requires that the needs of the most vulnerable members of the community be carefully considered. Therefore, to build a disaster-resilient Rio Grande Valley, it is vital to carefully consider those who, with low disaster preparedness, and educate and encourage them to prepare for disasters. All right. Legend of Zelda.
I know, it's a weird pick. You wouldn't expect it, but it actually is a post-apocalyptic game.
Good job.
Excuse me.
You got this.
Post-apocalyptic game. So we find out, or Link finds out throughout the game as he gains his memories back, that 100 years ago he was part of a plan to actually stop Calamity Ganon from reemerging after Calamity Ganon had been sealed away for 10,000 years. So Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions from around the land, just the 6 of them, get together and try to help Zelda get her sealing powers, which, with her mother not being around anymore, it falls to her. So that's their plan. And they didn't realize, so they were basically going to do exactly what they did 10,000 years ago, or very similarly, not expecting that Ganon would have learned from his previous mistake and managed to actually kill all 4 champions and take over their divine beasts. And actually managed to kill Link as well, which is why you wake up in the Resurrection Shrine 100 years later. But with Link's death, it actually allows Zelda, she comes into her sealing powers at that moment, and she seals herself away with Ganon temporarily. So their entire plan was completely based on just Zelda's sealing powers. That was it. It was, we have to do the same thing we did 10,000 years ago, and Zelda has to seal them away. I'm sure it'll be fine. She'll get her sealing powers. It'll be fine. It's not fine. So with this, they really needed to make many, many contingency plans. So didn't exactly follow that.
Okay, so I just noticed that we're at 42 minutes, so we got to speed up.
Oh.
We got to get to the good stuff. All right, to prep or not to prep? Oblivion. Yes or no? You didn't do Oblivion?
No.
Oh, I think this was one of the ones my husband found, but he is at the Proto Men concert, so I appreciate all of you being here. All right, we're going to skip it.
It doesn't.
All right.
Let's go with that. It doesn't.
So the last DISA principle we looked at is who is at the table. When we first started, the definition said your vulnerable communities should be part of, they're the ones that are mostly affected during a disaster. But during these games, we don't see a lot of those vulnerable communities. We don't see people of color, low income, people that live in areas that are prone to disasters, like low-lying coastal areas. So there's always room for growth and improvement, as the GIF says. All right, we have some honorable mentions for games that we didn't cover. SimCity, pretty much everyone's introduction to disaster science and emergency management. Pandemic, making pandemics happen before 2020. I did find that they have a government shutdown module on their website. It gives you conditions to play with that added actual real-world complication. Fallout 3 is set in DC, and one of the missions is to fix the water treatment plant. This is what it looks like in the game. This is what it actually looks like in DC. The Washington Aqueduct, which I have worked at through work, has been in continuous operation since 1863, providing potable water to the District of Columbia, Arlington County, Virginia since 1927, and the City of Falls Church service area, and Fairfax County in 2014. If you look it up, you can see it. It is run by the Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District, which is where I work. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Another honorable mention is Horizon Zero Dawn. It sounded really cool. We didn't have enough time to research it or figure out what it was about.
Also-
I found out too late about it.
It's robots. It's robots. So it's kind of not super applicable.
That's how I found out about it.
Yeah. Super cool, super not applicable.
It's on the table.
Ooh.
Maybe not autonomous, but they're getting there. All right, so real world trips, this is really why you're here. So as a disaster scientist, this is what I would recommend. Have a plan, revisit it, and test it out. Don't just think about it, actually commit some time to figuring out what you're gonna do, what your options are. Paralysis is normal. You should expect it, recognize it, and overcome it. So if you think about when you're in a car accident, you're in that bit of shock, you don't know what to do, but eventually you remember that, oh, I have to get out of the car, I need to, figure out insurance and all that. When a disaster happens, and hopefully we are not in that situation, remember that. Know your surroundings. That's why we went over the exit route. The main point I want to make here is just get out. GTFO. Everyone for themselves, and especially during group outings. Agree on an assembly area ahead of time. A lot of what happens during fires, they've done studies on nightclubs and the way people evacuate during the fire, and it's like, oh, where did Billy go? Let me go get him. So those people don't come out because they went back into the hazardous area. So just get out. Get out. Do not follow Fight Club's airplane card from Project Mayhem's example, but do look at your emergency card on the plane. Your brain will remember, and it'll be easier to go through that paralysis moment because you know where the exits are. You know what you need to do. Constant vigilance, like Mad Eye Moody says. Be aware of your surroundings, weather, tides, events, and evacuation routes. Becca almost met Jim Cantori.
I did. I was actually a mile away from Jim Cantori during the worst blizzard I was ever in Connecticut. And oh boy, when I saw him on the TV, I was not happy that I knew exactly where he was.
All right, money. Savings to cover evacuation expenses, travel, hotel. Have a car and keep it in working order. Those are all things that we take for granted, but are things that will be very important. Who is your most vulnerable population? The elderly, kids, and pets. Keep them in mind when you're doing your planning. Does anybody have questions? Yes?
That's kind of a weird one, but I noticed that you didn't really cover any sociologically created emergencies like a coup or would you consider those not disasters? Like they haven't risen to disaster, or is it just like a totally different thought process?
So those, the main aspect for disaster science is that something happens that affects the your social community as a whole for an extended period of time. And that's usually, you don't have power, you don't have water. I'm not sure where a coup would fall. I have had an argument with a professor about a discussion about whether or not school shootings should be included as part of disaster planning, or is it just an emergency, right? But that community is impacted when that happens, so it's something that needs to be considered and kind of thought about in everybody's planning as well. Yes? Oh.
One of the things in disaster management is to try to keep it simple and uniform. So look at January 6th was a mass gathering event that went badly. So what you should look at is what your city recommends you do in the event of a mass gathering event, like a concert or this convention. So yeah, the same thing. And
Brilliant extra examples too. Thank you.
You didn't raise your hand when I asked for disopeeps at the beginning.
Oh,
Okay, fine, fair. Technicality. Okay.
semantics.
Any other questions?
Questions, comments?
Yes.
I just appreciate you pointing out that you really don't need to worry about other people per se. Like, I appreciate you pointing out the structural things. Like, I study sociology, so I'm a big fan of talking about structural things over individual. And like prepping, my stepfather's a prepper.
Oh, jeez.
And you
Ooh.
wouldn't believe it. He has no water. None. We talk about like, so, but no water. He's like, it's fine. I don't think
It's not fine.
we need to talk to each other in our community who can help us, not be, I'm going to do it myself. He's like, no, I'll do it myself.
A lot of the thing with preppers is that it's hard to word it. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
You're talking about looting. Can you expand more on what's actually happening versus what they're saying is happening and why the motivation might be to play it up?
So, thank you for the question. The question is to go back into looting and why would the news play it up?
The news or whoever, like what would the motivation be?
With the motivation. Okay, so we indicated that for disasters, the most vulnerable populations are affected. These are also communities that are over-policed, and when a disaster happens, everybody goes there. The news wants to see what's going on. They want to keep everybody updated. Okay, great. So when looting happens, that type of crime happens, when people see it as a looting activity, you don't know if it was like a regular crime that was supposed to happen, right? Any other day with not 20 million cameras around. You also, you don't know why the motivation is. Are they breaking in and taking only necessary supplies? Does it matter? Why is it important to whoever's reporting on this? So I guess as people, we like to find a bad guy and point like, oh, look at these people, these terrible things are going on. Mayhem in the streets. Because it would be bad to report, oh, well, everybody is behaving and doing things like they were supposed to. It's just taking a little bit longer. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, you have to consider sensationalism and bias as well.
That's the word. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who exactly is doing said looting, for instance, and which news outlet is reporting it, for instance. And then, of course, ratings. Everybody expects a looter. We're going to show a looter. There we go.
Orange here.
You mentioned like pets as a vulnerable community when you're doing your plan, and unlike people, you can't be like, if this were a meeting when the house gets on fire. And I was just wondering, like, if you have any like suggestions for how to take pets into consideration or like sources.
So the question was about how to take pets into consideration with your planning. FEMA has some information about that. They even have information for like farmers. So you could look on their website. What I've seen people do is train their pet so that they're not scared of the carrier. So if you have an emergency and you have to get them into the carrier, it's easier for you to do that at that time. But I'm going to reference you to FEMA and maybe the ASPCA. They were at a disaster mini con at my county, so they had some information about that as well.
I think that's especially interesting because like my cat isn't afraid of the carrier, but if a fire alarm goes off, like
Yeah,
I can't find it.
all bets are off.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
To that I would say figure out where their usual hiding spot is and try to find them that way. Black shirt in the middle here.
Comment from my friend who has a parrot who's a prepper. They say what everyone should have is a manual can opener in case anything goes bad. If you need to get supplies for any reason, guess what? Everything's
Yes.
Preparing for, just in case. Just in case.
A lot of times prepping tends to be a kind of cathartic hobby for those who are actually into it. Like it might not actually have real preparedness value in the case of an emergency, but it makes them feel better, so that's why they do it. Yep.
Any other questions? No, we have an actual question. Yes.
So the science says that like people are getting help all the time, mostly. Is that what you're?
Yes. So
The movies that shows the games where they have insular communities who are protecting their resources, like that's theoretically probably not going to happen.
in that case, if the community is with their resources, that is their community, and that's how they're kind of working things out. But as a whole, like overall, when things happen, your neighbors will come help you. Yeah. Yeah. All right. One more. I have a QR code. Part of the HSEEP, which I mentioned with DISA, is feedback. So it's a Google form. There's minimum required questions. We just want to know about you a little bit. But once you answered the required questions, it'll give you a link to download a PDF of the full presentation we just did. So.
And we have copies of said QR code up in the front row if you would like to scan them.
We forgot our tape. And
We
if you
did.
came in later, I have ribbons to give you +2 survival resilience for being at this panel today. And thank you.
Thank you.